It's a program of Jewish information, inspiration, motivation, and transformation here on The Gavriel Sanders Show.
Shalom Aleichem, and thank you for dedicating some of your valuable time today to hear the program. I am Gavriel, your host for the next 28 minutes, and in today's lineup, Rabbi David Aaron launches a look into the subject of immortality, living forever. And then I engaged Meredith Jacobs, director of Jewishwomen International, in a sobering conversation about the common culture's application of a double standard when it comes to topics affecting Jewish women, like what happened on October 7th. But now, let's hear Rabbi David Aaron of the Old City's Oraita Yeshiva here on the Gavriel Sanders Show.
When I was a child, I had this strange thought. I wondered who I would have been if my mother would have married another man. Did you ever kind of think that? It's a strange, it's really kind of ridiculous. What do you mean? If your mother would have married another man, you would not have existed. No, that's not what we experience. We somehow intuit that I would have existed, but I would have existed playing another character, which is what we discussed in some of our early talks. And that really the self is transmittable, right? That I could have been short and redhead, or I could have been tall and blonde. But there's an I that transcends the particular me. There's an I that transcends the particular time, space, here, now, me. The Kabbalah teaches that actually death is an illusion, and that we will never die. See, I tell people, as I mentioned before, I like to freak people out. So I tell people, I'm not going to die. David Aaron is going to die, but I'm not going to die. I play David Aaron, and as we mentioned in one of the earlier talks, it's like an actor who's been given a role to play, and part of that role is to die. And then he takes it seriously, and he literally actually dies on stage, right? So too, the soul, the real you, lives on. But the question is, what happens when you leave your body, when you leave your persona? In Jewish tradition, we actually refer to death not as death as much as lihitpater. What it really means is you take leave of. You are patur, you are freed of your body, but you continue to exist. The question that I want to address is, what happens in the afterlife? What is the afterlife? And really, the Kabbalah teaches us that the quality of our life after death, so to speak, or after dropping our body or dropping our character, our persona, is really determined on how we lived our lives. The Kabbalah teaches that when a person dies, there are a number of routes they can take. One route is called reincarnation, which means that a person has not finished their mission on earth, and therefore they have to come back. And they could come back not only as a human being, but they could actually come back as an animal. They could come back as something mineral or vegetable. The difference between a dog and a dog that has a human soul is a dog that has a human soul knows it's a dog. Right? A dog doesn't know it's a dog. It's not like a dog thinks, gee, look at that cat. What a great life she has. I wish I could be a cat. A dog is a dog is a dog. But a dog that is really a human being that came back as a dog and has to live a dog life to kind of learn lessons that the soul didn't learn in its past life, knows it's a dog and is deeply disturbed by the fact that it's a dog. Now, I heard an amazing story from some fellow who told me that he had a cat that was following him. And it was so bizarre, he couldn't understand, why is this cat following him? So he tells a friend of his, and his friend says, this cat could be a reincarnation of some soul that you've had dealings with in a past life, and maybe you need to forgive it, right? So he says, oh, what are you talking about? He says, next time you see this cat, turn to the cat and say, I forgive you. So the guy said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to talk to a cat. He said, well, I'm telling you, if you think this cat is following you. So the next case, sure enough, there's the same cat and he's following him. He says, okay. Finally turns to the cat and says, I forgive you. And the cat looks at him and says, no way. I'm just joking. The cat just looks at him and takes off, and he never sees the cat again. Now, weird stories like that. But the Kabbalah does tell us that there is something called reincarnation. Now, reincarnation doesn't mean that David Aaron comes back. It means that I, playing David Aaron, comes back and play another part. And it might be a human part, but it might be an animal part or even something less than that. However, the Kabbalah also says that something else could happen when a person dies, that they don't have to come back. Rather, they are ready to go on to what's called Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is really a state of incredible deep satisfaction. And in this state of deep satisfaction, a person is able to really appreciate and enjoy the good deeds and the commandments that they had fulfilled in their lives. You see, it's what has happened really is we've allowed our body to become somewhat of the overriding experiential Geiger counter in our lives. So, for instance, when we eat a pizza, we immediately feel a buzz. But when we do a good deed, it's a lot more ethereal. It's a lot more subtle. But when we leave our body, we are able to go into a state of mind, which is called Gan Eden, where we're able to actually viscerally experience the joy of fulfilling our mission and doing God's work on earth. And that's called the Garden of Eden. And that's what could happen to a person when they leave this world. But there's something else that could happen to a person who doesn't have to come back. They have completed their mission, so they don't have to come back. But they haven't completed their mission in the most perfect form. And they have to go to a state of mind or an experience called Gehenna, which has been loosely translated as hell. Now, really, this concept of hell is not an eternal experience. It's actually a temporary experience whereby one needs some preparation in order to get to that beautiful state called Gan Eden. In the Gehenna experience, one goes through a process of preparation. I've heard it described as somewhat like going to a movie. And here you leave your body and you suddenly find yourself in a movie theater. So you're a little surprised and you ask the fellow next to you, well, what's showing? He says, oh, you'll see. And you discover it's actually a double feature. And what's this double feature? Well, it starts off and the title is Your Life. I'm starring you. And the next feature is what your life could have been. And depending on how well these two movies match will determine how hot your popcorn gets. So, the idea is this embarrassment where you get this perspective on life when you leave your body and you suddenly realize how you could have lived your life in contrast to how you did live your life. It can be really a painful truth. But nonetheless, a pain that is empowering you to refine you and ready yourself to embrace the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden experience.
You're tuned to the Gavriel Sanders Show, broadcasting on WNEW 102.7 FM HD3 New York and around the world on TalkLineNetwork.com.
I've come across a resource recently that you need. It's the Debater's Guide to the Middle East Conflict, written by Dr. Stephen Feld. Today, more than ever, you can't afford to be historically illiterate about the origins of the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially considering what's percolating on campuses today. Dr. Feld has encapsulated the backdrop to the conflict in just 25 pages. So if you're a student on campus today, you need this guide. If you're the parent or grandparent or friend or employer of a Jewish student on campus, you need this guide. And it's free. Pause a moment now to send me an email at gavrielradio@gmail.com. That's Gavriel radio@gmail.com. And I'll email this important guide to you. Today's Gen Z is sorely lacking in truth on this subject. So let's stamp out the ignorance by first getting informed ourselves. Email me now, Gavriel radio@gmail.com.
Bringing you information, inspiration, motivation, and transformation. On the Gavriel Sanders Show.
So joining me today is Meredith Jacobs. She runs a fabulous organization called Jewishwomen, international. Their presence is significant, and their impact has been equally so. About a year and a half ago, she helped put together one of the, puzzle pieces in this book, Extreme Trauma. And she wrote an article called "The Women's Movement Has a Double Standard When Sexual Violence Happens to Jews." With your permission, Meredith, I'm just going to read the very end of it, and that'll be our jumping off point for our discussion, because it ends on a very somber, sobering note. After going through a whole description of the experience after October 7th and her reaction to the non-reaction of the world, she writes, "I'm overwhelmed by a sense of aloneness in the world. But even if what we say will not make a difference, we must continue to tell the simple reality. Violence against Jewish bodies, Israeli bodies, is a crime against humanity. The world might ignore it, but that doesn't make it any less true." That's a heavy note to end on. You had a meeting right after October 7th, on October the 12th, with, a body of organizations, women's groups, and you were stunned by their silence on the issue. Can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah, JWI, we were originally known as B'nai B'rith Women, who, for those who don't know, so we're closing in on 130 years of Jewish American women's work. Our mission is ending violence against women and girls. Back in the 80s, one of our members was shot and killed by her estranged husband. So we originally went into this work looking at domestic violence and sexual assault. And because of our work, we sit on many mainstream coalitions. So the call that I was on is a weekly call with leaders of the largest feminist organizations. And quite often, there are times that we collaborate, we amplify each other's work. It's a very collegial, supportive community. And if something happens to one community during the call, others will acknowledge it, will share their concern, their shared pain, will, at a minimum, put a heart emoji in the chats. I don't know what it was. I can honestly say I don't think that I had ever experienced anti-Semitism in my life up until then. I've been very fortunate. On that Monday following October 7th, the young woman who facilitates these calls happens to be Jewish. And she said to me, "Meredith, do you want to use some time to talk about what just happened?" And something in my gut just said, no. And I don't know why. I don't know why the gut was, this is not safe. Mm-hmm. And I said, call the other Jewish women's organization. And there's two of us. And she said, "I already did." They also said no. So during the call, she took it upon herself to say, I want to acknowledge what just happened this weekend and that we have two Jewish colleagues on and want to acknowledge their pain. And it was silence. Eerily so. And then I finally just wrote, "Thank you," in the chat and logged off. What I wrote in the article and what I know, and it's shocking hearing that those sentences read back to me because I could write them right now, all these months later, and feel the exact same, if not more so. There are core tenets, and that is we believe women. We never blame the victim, and we never justify rape. And yet, that wasn't held for Israeli women, and by extension, Jewish women. I remember soon after the article came out, I was invited to speak on a webinar along with Miriam Schler, who was then the executive director of the Tel Aviv Rape Crisis Center. And she said, what is so horrible in this moment is that the world does not believe us. And in that moment, there was that shared pain. And I thought, if at a minimum, what we need to do now is say, I believe Israeli women. In my mind, that was different from what I knew the Israeli government had put out. It was doing a campaign around the same time that said, believe Israeli women. And to me, there's a nuance in the phrasing. One is asking, please believe us. And the other is unequivocally stating, I believe you. And if at a minimum, if that's all we could do, that was what I wanted to do. But that was the birth of work that, in all the years I've been doing this, is the hardest work I've ever done. Mm-hmm. And it is what, when I look back on my life, I will be the most proud of. It's been coming up soon enough, 2 years. Mm-hmm. Is anything different? I've learned so much more. I was blissfully naive October 6th. I remember recently, maybe a couple months ago, there was a webinar run by the University of California, Berkeley's Women's Studies Department. It was a webinar that was required for its students if the students were to get a grade higher than a B. The original title of the webinar was How Zionism is Weaponizing Feminism. There were complaints, and so they changed the title to something seemingly innocuous, LGBTQ and women's support for Gaza. So because it was online, many of us logged in. We had actually reached out to offer to have an Israeli expert be included. And of course, those calls were ignored. And there were 3 women who spread lie after lie, saying that all of the purported evidence of rape from October 7th was a lie, was actually debunked by the Israeli government, and was a way to divert attention from the IDF having raped Palestinian men, women, and children since 1948. And I left shaking and saying, this is being taught to young minds who look up to their professors. And I said, oh my goodness. And I was talking to Professor Pam Nadell from American University, who actually has a book coming out chronicling the history of anti-Semitism in America. And I said, Pam, are you seeing this on your campus? My goodness, they are training future women's leaders to hate Israel. And she said, Meredith, they've been doing this since the 80s, and in some cases since the 60s. And so when I look at all of the things that went into the women's movement being silent or even denying or even saying that Israel was somehow using the idea of rape to gain global support, to which I would say then they did a bad job, because where is that global support? It is so complicated. It is on so many levels. It's the way social media has been weaponized, not only in all cases of conflict-related sexual violence, and JWI actually produced a report on this, looking at how social media is used against Ukrainian women, Yazidi women, other areas where there has been conflict-related sexual violence or rape as a weapon of war, how it is used to distort and deny. But the way it was used around October 7th and ongoing, we believe, with the hostages, is a way of delegitimizing, dehumanizing. There's a double standard. For me, that's the definition of anti-Semitism. Like, no one's talking about what is happening to the Druze women right now. So often the world does ignore violence against women, does ignore rape as a weapon of war. Silence is not unusual. But around Israel, the way it spread like wildfire. And I think that's the anti-Semitism that fueled it. And the way the campaign on social media was, where's the proof? Where's the proof? Which in this day and age of AI and deep fakes, we're now living in a world where truth is viewed as lies and lies are viewed as fake, because it planted that seed of denial.
What do you and colleagues in other organizations feel can be done moving forward? Because all of a sudden, well, not so much all of a sudden, because you mentioned how far back the roots of this go, both in terms of decades and institutions that propagate it. But what do you feel, from your vantage point, can be done to, at best, neutralize some of this toxicity that's happening in these campuses, in halls of government, in the minds of policymakers and people that determine who gets money, who gets believed?
It's a multi-pronged approach. I mean, this was definitely a wake-up call, and now we're playing catch-up from decades of embedded hate. I think we have to make sure that we're there for other women, whether it's young women on college campuses, and we're seeing it uniquely also with the ripple effects of the rape denial, how this plays out with Jewish survivors of sexual assault. Jewish survivors of domestic violence are not feeling safe accessing mainstream organizations. JWI leads a project we call Here For You, where we go into Jewish JCCs or day schools or Jewish communal organizations, and we teach the staff about domestic violence and how this might show up in the women and the children that they care for. And we always connect them in their community with the local domestic violence agency. In some places that might be led by the Jewish community. There are Jewish domestic violence agencies that treat all women, but they were founded and funded by the Jewish community, so they uniquely know how to treat Jewish survivors. We were in a community where there wasn't a Jewish agency, and we reached out to the mainstream agency to say, we're doing this training at the JCC. Come, we want to make sure they know who to refer people to. If survivors come forward and need help, we want to know who to send them to. And the agency said, no, thank you. Our staff supports Gaza.
Ugh.
On college campuses, we're hearing that the women's centers put up a sukkah for Gaza. So there are places where and we know for years now, places where the sexual assault survivor groups on campuses are kicking out Jewish survivors because they're Zionists. So we need to make sure that Jewish women here feel heard, feel safe, feel like they have a community. That was one of the reasons that we co-founded, I Believe Israeli Women movement with the Seed the Dream Foundation, was to provide a community, a support. We have to make sure that the voices of survivors are lifted and affirmed and heard. When women, brave women like Amit Susanna, come forward and are faced with hate, ugliness when they come forward, that we're there posting positive support, that we're sharing, that we're uplifting, that we're making sure that they know there is a community who believes them and that they're heard. Mm-hmm. We have to make sure work like that of the Dina Project, their recent report, is amplified, that we can do what we can to bring that to members of Congress, to the UN, to make sure that this work is heard. And there's something else that we're doing. And this was inspired. I was at the Knesset a year ago, May, and member of Knesset, MK Shelley Talmarone, held a meeting of a brand new coalition on conflict-related sexual violence. And I heard Nava Ben-Or, who was a former judge in Israel and is a member of the Dina Project. She spoke and she said, Israeli women will never have justice. But if one day when someone talks about Darfur and Sudan and Ukraine and says Be'eri, Nova, Kfar Aza, she said, we will have historic justice. Mm-hmm. And so that inspired me. We did following the release of our report on how social media is weaponized in conflict-related sexual violence. JWI had a panel at UN CSW, which is the meetings of the Commission on the Status of Women. We had an international panel. We had someone representing the Yazidi community, someone from the Ukrainian community, as well as experts on disinformation. Mm-hmm. The room held 90. We had standing room only, over 100 people in the room, including many, many, many who were not Jewish and who were not Israeli. And they listened for the first time with open ears what happened on October 7th. And we have since created a coalition of these global organizations working on CRSV. And we also include Israeli organizations. And that is something that I think is long-term, to make sure that Israel has a seat at the table, that they are recognized by other organizations, so that, God forbid, something happens again, they're not met with silence in those group convenings.
What would you say to the average person out there? I mean, really, they fall into a couple of categories. There are people within the Jewish community who still, they may be aware of what happened in general terms, but aren't necessarily perhaps affected by it in their workaday world. They might have kids on campus that have some issues, but more or less they're okay. But the truth is they're not okay, because we're all connected. And then to the broader public, people of conscience, for sure. What do people need to do now going forward as we come up on 2 years since this has taken place? What information do you feel is available to people? How can people influence their sphere of influence, what we call in Hebrew their Dalet Amot? What are you telling people to do to raise their own consciousness, to remember, to not forget, like the Holocaust, and to be active in some way?
That's a great question. I remember soon after October 7th, the Israeli embassy reached out to me and invited me, along with others, to watch the raw footage. I have since seen even more evidence that was even more horrifying than what was released. And I remember so many people in my life said to me, don't go. You don't need to put yourself through that. You'll have nightmares. And I said, I need to go. I need to bear witness. And I find that people don't want to hear about it, don't want to talk about it, don't want to see. And what I would say to people is bear witness, listen, go to webinars, screenings, whether watch documentaries, go if Nova is in your community, go see that. If there's a survivor speaking in your community, go learn, talk to the people, make sure that you are informed so that if someone doesn't know, you can share that. Again, it's these little ripple effects. The more you know, the more you can feel confident answering back when someone comes at you with denial or disinformation, because that's who people are going to believe. They're going to believe their friends. They're going to believe their family. Media is already so skewed in our little bubbles of information. We read and listen to and believe what we agree with. But when you hear it from someone in your sphere of influence, you're going to believe them. So I want people to learn and not be afraid to learn and not be afraid to then be a voice. You don't have to go make a speech. You don't have to write an op-ed. You can just sit down for coffee with someone and just know how to respond.
Well, we think on that note, one of the reasons the book Extreme Trauma was put together was to provide a digest of information from a mosaic of voices so that people would know what to say, because the book is very broad-based in terms of the background on the events, and some of it's hard reading, as you well know, and also to have a focus on the resilience of the Jewish people. I like to call it the rubber band effect of snapping back and becoming better as opposed to bitter. And then the future hope that we're all embracing to come out of this like a phoenix rising. There's so many different individuals and organizations around the world to stand for and preserve truth. Who was it? I think it was Mark Twain that said that a lie will travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. That's really been astonishing to so many people of conscience to see how such putrid toxicity could be spread, of this blood libels, if you will. What just happened recently about the boy, last name Ragab, I think his name was, from Gaza, who has a disease being treated in Italy, but portrayed as if Israel is starving him. You know, these terrible tropes and misrepresentations and myth, I call them myth perceptions, that are being propagated. So I want to thank you that you're one of the champions of the Jewish world, and for the labor of love that you do above and beyond all the demands of the day, what you do for all of our collective good. We encourage people to get informed about Jewishwomen International. I'm sure there are great resources on your website, yes?
Yes, and please check out I Believe Israeli Women and become part of our global movement so that you gain all of the information and resources that we offer every week. And you can keep up with the most recent and you can take action.
Meredith Jacobs, a modern-day Devorah, thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you.
This program showcases people, organizations, and opportunities for making a difference. Tune in next week for another freshly baked edition of The Gavriel Sanders Show. You can reach Gavriel at gavrielradio@gmail.com. That's GAVRIEL radio@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.